So the Arab world has seen a resurgence of movements that have ousted dictatorial leaders. What's notable about these movements is that they have been peaceful and nonviolent. So today I want to talk to you about what's going on in Algeria and what's come to be known as the Smile Revolution, and how what's happening in Algeria is a way to disprove this myth of Arab exceptionalism. So to begin, I kind of want to draw a bit of a timeline of what's been going on. So if you've been following the events of what's happening in the region, earlier this year, some nonviolent movements or protests have started in Algeria. Now I start off with February 2nd as the date, but I think it's important to note that it was the date in which the president, the current president, Bouteflika, or I guess not the current president at this point, but at that point he was the current president, and he had announced his candidacy for the 5th term. But while this looks like a trigger point, it's important to also note that Algerians in 2014, but also as part of the Arab Spring in 2011, there had been some discussions of them also coming together to protest, but at that time it didn't come into anything. In 2014, there had been some minor attempts by different groups to come together and protest him running for a 4th term, but it didn't mobilize what we're seeing today, when on February 2nd he announced he was running for a 5th term, and that's when people came together to say enough is enough. And I think what's important to also understand is this president has not only exceeded the term limits in their constitution, which is something that they hold very dearly given their history of both the fighting with the French, or the revolution that came from the French settlements, but also their own civil war. The other important element of this as well is that this president currently is very incapacitated. So he's unable to actually run the government. He had a stroke in 2013, and in 2014, during his 4th term, wasn't even able to run, but continued to do so, and that brought a lot of Algerians together to say, at this point, enough is enough. And so on February 22nd, again, it looks like another massive and important date is when a lot of the mass movements began, but between February 2nd and February 22nd, there were some small minor protests happening here and there, but the large one came together on February 22nd. By March 11th, the president announced that he's no longer running for a 5th term, and by March 26th, the Army Chief of Staff, which is an important event I'll talk about later, announced or demanded actually that the president no longer should stay as president and that he should resign. And we saw this quickly happen by April 2nd. He actually did resign, which is a very important event. April 9th, the protesters rejected the interim government that was put together. And today's date, as of this morning for us, but in the afternoon in Algeria, people came together again to protest. So these movements have been going on for 12 consecutive weeks of people coming together on Friday officially, but also throughout the week, depending on whether they're university students and are able to join together to protest, but have been regularly coming together for the past 12 weeks. So I want to start off with one of the most important lessons of nonviolent movements, being that there needs to be high participation numbers. So when the protests were started in February 22nd, the estimates were somewhere between 20,000 to 800,000, very large number differences, but I think it's important to note to see that there was already a large number that was getting together. By early March, the numbers looked more like 500,000 of people were joining these protests. Again, other numbers, it's all more on the conservative side. Other numbers are saying that there's around 1 million at this point. But since then, it's been regularly and consistently seen as more than millions of people are joining together in these protests. So high participation numbers. How are they able to do this? Lessons 2 and 3 are about diversity and inclusion. Women's groups, youth, university students, elders, persons with disabilities, all have been groups that are joining in on these protests. It's not just been dominated by one particular group. Many groups are coming in together. It's happening all across Algeria. This isn't just concentrated in the capital and only happening with a certain part of the citizenry. It is happening all across the country. And of course, what they wanted to maintain is that this be secularist. So this isn't one certain belief that's taking over the protest or one certain ideology. It is everybody who's Algerian and is uniting together to make sure that they're all protesting under a common message. What's helping bring these high numbers but also ensuring diversity and inclusion? Our fourth lesson is that there's been a network of leaders that are coming together to ensure that people are aware of what's going on. So this isn't one particular leader, not one strong man rising and saying, I'm claiming the protest to myself. These are different networks that are existing in the country. Part of it is silent as well. They're using many different platforms like social media, things like Facebook groups to announce what they're doing. But they're also together, meeting regularly and ensuring that people are aware of what's going on and what kind of messaging they need to get together. And this has greatly improved the diversity I was mentioning for lessons 2 and 3. Lesson 5, and a very important lesson, it's that they're maintaining a nonviolent discipline. Now, this sounds very obvious, right? You're calling it a nonviolent movement, you obviously have to maintain a nonviolent discipline. But what's interesting about this is that they're very intentional about it. It's not a coincidence that they're nonviolent. They're actually intentionally making sure the messaging around this is clear to the people involved in the protest. So things like this motto that they've been having of Silmiya, Silmiya, which is peace, peace in Arabic, and adopting peaceful attitudes have helped them ensure that nonviolence is something that is maintained throughout. And then, of course, they share messages with each other on what to do when violent protesters are coming in and have chosen to cooperate with authorities, again, signaling to authorities that they're not trying to attack them or target them. They're coming together to share a message with the government and using this platform to ensure people are inclusive. And I think one other additional note that is very important about maintaining a nonviolent attitude in these protests is that that's what helps them ensure then that they're able to maintain an element of diversity and inclusion. So that when people are looking, should I join? Should I make sure I'm part of this movement? Should I be scared that my child might get attacked or that something's going to happen to my mother or someone like that if they're joining? There's no fear of that because the protesters have come together to ensure that that's not a problem and that they will work with authorities to make sure that. One of the things that I found really great actually was shared by both Doug and Erica, which is this fascinating article that this journalist wrote listing 18 commandments. And it's quite beautiful because in these commandments, what he's saying is encouraging people to walk peacefully together, hand in hand, have water for thirsty protesters, and not view the police as people they need to be attacking, but this idea that there's constant messaging around what a nonviolent movement means. Lesson 6, and one that's been very interesting to follow, given also what happened this morning, was that there have been a lot of loyalty shifts. So the notable one, of course, is the military. The Army Chief of Staff, early on, as you recall from the timeline, had announced that he no longer is seeing the current president, which is a longtime friend of his, as the rightful incumbent of that position, and has withdrew his support from him. And as of this morning, the protesters are now seeing him as someone that they no longer align themselves with. For a while, they thought he was part of the movement, and the protesters thought that, but now they see him just as another one of like the croonies of the Algerian government, people that they want removed. And so even this morning, there have been signs added that they want him to be removed from the army as the Army Chief of Staff. And of course, it's important because when we watch what's going on with nonviolent movements, we want to know what's going on with the military. Are they with the protesters, or are they on a different side, and how that's shaping as the movement moves forward? And of course, we've seen other loyalty shifts. So judges have not, when initially President Bouteflika was still going to run for his, the 5th term, they were saying that we won't oversee any ballots or count any ballots or like make sure the process is moving forward if he remains as a candidate. Lesson 7, they've had clear and functional objectives. I think what's notable also about this movement is it started off with one clear objective of we don't want him to run for a 5th term, and has since then evolved a lot. So it's gone from we don't want him to run for a 5th term to we don't want him as president. So now there's been a lot of maximalist demands of we just don't want this government altogether. So it's interesting to watch as their objectives has changed, kind of as their vision of what they want as part of the protests. And I think it's going to be even more interesting to observe what they're going to consider their final victory. So at what point are they going to say we've achieved the victory that we want, to say that we're done protesting? And last, lesson 8, as you can see, there's been clearly strong organization. This isn't spontaneous. They're not just randomly getting together, each one coming up with their own signs and determining what they want to do in that day. These are things that are being planned together by this network of leaders and shared with the people on how they need to come together to protest, and successfully been able to do this for 12 weeks. And here's just an example of some creative signs they've come up with. And I encourage you, if you're really interested in this in your free time, to look at some photos of the creativity that's come together when looking at this. So in the middle, there's a guy that has a sign that says Wi-Fi on it. People are connected. The government or the system is disconnected. And another one saying that this is our movement, we don't want foreign interference. So people have been coming up with ways to assert themselves in this protest. And I think one of the large things that we can think about and look to as Algeria's movement is unfolding, literally as we were sitting here today, is that this is another way to show kind of people who are arguing that Arabs are fundamentally undemocratic and that they're unable to organize together or assert social movements to change their forms of government, to kind of have agency over what their government should look like. Algeria is another example of how this is not true, and that this myth is very dangerous because it's shaping a lot of what's happening in the region. So it's important then to see this as not just what's going on in Algeria as just an Algerian situation, but it's also applicable to what's going on in the region. And of course, people have been watching. So Egyptians are seeing what's going on. We've seen reports of how Sudanese were observing what's going on in Algeria. And all of these then lessons that we're learning from Algeria as things that are actually deliberately happening by the people and they're choosing what they need to do to ensure their movement is strong, are things that the rest of the region, of course the world, can look to when activists are coming together to determine how they can put forward a strong civil resistance campaign or way in which they can protest what their governments are essentially taking away from them. Thank you.